Great.
Brill, thank you, Sharon. So yeah, my name's Joe, and I'm here with Jonathan, who is this side to me, he's over here.
Oh.
And we're going to be talking for the next kind of 45, 50 minutes so about what we've been up to at NUSTEM at Northumbria University and the work we've been doing with our partner schools. Before we just get into that, we're going to use a piece of software, online software called Padlet to collect our thoughts today. Because there's so many of you, the chat function really isn't going to work very well for lots of questions because it's going to come streaming through. So we're going to use Padlet. I'm going to share with you a link to the Padlet now.
That also means that hopefully we can kind of capture ideas and thoughts as we go along, so that if you have to drop in or out, or your bandwidth drops in or out, or your children drop in or out, you can kind of pick up where we left off, and we've got a record of the session that's perhaps a little bit more digestible than a video. So.
Yeah. So you'll see when you click on that link something that looks a little bit like this. Hopefully you can all see that right now. We've got, getting back into the Zoom call, we've got some of the resources that you can kind of download afterwards and have a look at. And these two Padlets here, the one called Participants List and Questions and Comments, if you click on those, questions and comments is for later on, Participants List is for just right now. So if you were to click on it,
those are the two, just to describe that, Joe, these are the two tiles on top center of that home slide.
Yeah. So this participants list here, and if you can, if it works for you, the little pink button in the corner of my screen down here allows me to write my name and what I'm up to. Just one note, Padlet is entirely anonymous, so you could write everything you wanted to write, but we are watching very carefully. I assume that we're all professionals and we can we know how to behave on a Padlet. Yeah, so if you, there you go. It'll fill up. Sometimes it gets a bit upset and you need to refresh the screen. Yeah, and it'll fill up quite nicely. If you can't get into it right now because you're on an iPad or something like that, don't worry. These links will exist beyond the course of our session this morning, so you can come back and have a look at about what's going on.
Yeah,
great,
by all means, give us a hint about what's brought you to the event today.
I'm going to stop showing that because you can all see that on your own.
Yeah, it's kind of cool though.
Yeah, so we've got three sections this morning before we go into kind of discussions and questions, and what we're really looking forward to is actually the second part of the session where we get to we get to pose lots of questions and talk about what everybody else is doing and questions and queries they have. But we really want to make sure that we use the expertise within this entire room. So Jonathan and I are coming at this from a very specific angle that we'll talk about this morning, but you will have lots of different use cases for technology in various different settings, and there will be people who have levels of expertise. So as we go through, please feel free to share your expertise. If you know the answer and it looks like me and Jonathan have no idea what we're talking about, just jump in. And maybe be polite about it, but just jump in. So I'm going to pass over to Jonathan now, who's going to share his screen. And this is the third time in his life he's ever done this on Zoom. So best of luck to him.
There are so many ways this could go wrong. I'm not going to share my screen, Joe. I'm going to do it this way, aren't I? Oh, you're sharing. Oh, I've got a big version of me. That's kind of scary. One of the reasons we wanted to start with this Padlet thing is partly that we'll use it later, so it's a bit of familiarity with it, but also key take home number one, for those of you who are forced to leave us early, you're not alone. There are lots of us sharing the same trials and tribulations and trying to work out how we carry on doing what we do when we can't physically see the people that we're working with. The list of people who are attending, I saw the participant list last night, is a kind of who's who of the Science Centre movement, but also kind of wider than that as well. So welcome all. Quite where we go with this group, I'm not quite sure. It feels a little bit, as we've prepped this, like this is NUSTEM sharing what we've done in the last year, but parts of that will be relevant for some of you. Not all of it is going to be relevant for all of you, any of you. And there are things that we've not approached or had to tackle that are challenges that you will have that we're not part of that sort of scene. So Whether a similar session is held subsequently and who hosts that and where this group goes is a bit up to the group, and I hope that's the sort of thing we get to as we go through. So I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation. Hopefully you can see the text. Joe will tell me if it looks terrible. I'll pop myself over the side. For those of you who don't know us, NUSTEM is effectively an outreach group at the Faculty of Engineering and Environment at Northumbria Uni. We started as a Hefke Catalyst project about in 2014, actually. So we're now in the 7th year of operation of a 3-year project. And to an extent, we are a conventional university outreach group. The difference, I think, is that we started with a completely clean sheet of paper in 2014. So we are, steeped in the science capital rhetoric that was very prominent at that time, and in concepts of equity and access, and equity of access. We're very much careers focused. We focus quite a lot on primary because we think that's where we can make the biggest difference. We do work at secondary, but a lot of our focus is primary. And that's mostly the context that we're talking about today. And we're set up trying to provoke systemic change within the schools that we partner. So we work quite closely with several dozen schools from across the region, and we work in the long term with those schools. So all of those contexts are quite useful and quite important to us, but they also shape the approach we've taken in the last year. And what I want to talk about is where we started back in March, if you can remember back that far. We were in a kind of fortunate position in some ways that we knew we were still going to be around, which was a good thing. We also assumed right from very early on that this was going to be a long haul. There was a lot of talk in March, if you remember, about maybe we'll be open by Christmas, by summer, or if not summer, then September. And we never quite believed that. We sort of assumed that we had to plan for remote delivery of the core of our program for at least academic year 2020, 2021. And if it turns out we're wrong in that bet, then we've wasted some preparation time, but it could be worse. If we're right and we didn't do the prep, then for us that meant abandoning our schools for a year, or at least risking that, and that didn't feel like a viable risk for us. So we assumed very early on that we had to be able to continue the core program without being able to physically go into schools. A key part of that for us is delivering workshops in perhaps a conventional manner, but our reasons for doing that are perhaps slightly different. Yes, we're trying to deliver high quality STEM content, and sometimes that's research impact work, but more commonly, there's an element of teacher CPD about it. What we're trying to do is showcase a particular way of working, a particular way of approaching the science curriculum in the classroom that teachers that can then continue and replicate. Because what we want to do is move a change of practice within a school forward so that we can continue to support the school, but less actively over a period of 2 or 3 years. So working with teachers as a key audience, as well as children in the classroom, is a big driver of everything we do, and that follows through what we're talking about here. What that meant was continuing to talk to our primary schools and doing a little bit of a tech survey to see what they could do and what sorts of things were possible. Joe and I started trying to assemble bits of equipment that might be useful. So it's worth us introducing ourselves a little bit. Joe's background is in, do you want to do it? You're muted.
No, he always does this to me. My background's in primary education, so I left university with an engineering degree and quickly switched to primary education, and then moved into STEM outreach through Northern University about some years ago, when the project started. 6 years ago, 7.
However long.
A number of years ago.
A lifetime ago, Joe. And my background's slightly oddly video work, so web video and broadcast before that. So we're sort of the smallest group of people who span the full set, plus we're pretty geeky. It's worth noting, I think, that we spent a lot of time over the last few years, I think our boss is on the call, so we need to be slightly careful what we say, being terribly indulgent. building ridiculous contraptions for Maker Faire, but that experience gave Joe and I a particular kind of working dynamic, which has been really useful when, frankly, what we've done for the most part this summer or last summer was swear at technology, because to a first approximation, nothing works. Just nothing works, particularly when you can't get into your office and haul the nice stuff out of the cupboard or pinch it from your desk. You have to haul the 10-year-old kit out of the cupboard and turn it on for the first time in a decade and see if any of it still works, and then cobble stuff together with what you've got, which has been a real challenge as we've gone along. So second key point, however, is that there is a big battle to get the technology to do what you want, but it becomes clear as you emerge from that it's not about the technology. As soon as you're there, the technology disappears from your view, and you are back onto much more solid ground of shaping a visitor experience, an audience dynamic, an audience experience, and trying to work out what your audience need, what your participants need, and how you deliver that. The tech is just a set of tools, and we'll talk you through the process we went through and the particular set of tools that we've arrived at, and then Joe's going to show you some of the ways we've thought about that. But we're quite dismissive of a lot of the tech, and I love a good camera and nice lighting setup as much as anybody, but for a lot of what we're doing, it just doesn't matter that much compared to the dynamics that you can produce. So, classroom tech survey. We surveyed a quite large group of primary schools. It's worth noting that they are mostly in an urban setting, and they one of the things I'll be quite interested to see is how that compares with a more rural group that we're working with on other projects. Every classroom we came across has some means of getting video into the classroom. They have some means of showing video to the class, whether that's a smart board or a projection screen. That's typically linked to a classroom PC, a desktop PC. There is sometimes also a teacher laptop, but where the PC is driving the screen, absolutely critically, that tends not to have a webcam and microphone. So I'm sort of teasing that audio becomes the biggest challenge through all of this in terms of what we were trying to do. And the lack of a microphone on the classroom PC becomes a source of a lot of angst. One of the things we found that slightly surprised us is that every school we surveyed had some means of getting devices into the hands of students, usually a bookable cart that could be brought around. And I think every school in the survey, though we found a few exceptions since, had access to iPads, sometimes quite old iPads, but iPads were a thing that were pretty much blanket, which is remarkable because you can guarantee that iPads have a camera and a microphone and a half decent speaker and network access, probably. So that becomes extremely useful to have as a resource to hand. We asked schools what they were doing for video conferencing. This is towards the end of the summer term. And by then they'd all sorted something out. And about half or so of schools were doing Teams, were in the kind of Microsoft technology stack. A few in our sample were in Google Meet and were in the G Suite for Education stack. And critically, in some cases, on either side, their contracts for those services prevent them from using the other one. Quite a few schools, sometimes slightly illicitly, were also doing Zoom because that had worked for parents, so they'd sometimes just installed it themselves. So everybody had something that was common practice within their setting, but there's no single solution that worked for all the schools that we want to work with. One of the reasons this becomes important to know is that video quality in Teams is usually very good. Video quality in Zoom and Google Meet is usually not as good, to the point where it can become distracting. I don't know quite how good the slides are here. there was a point when Zoom was, is it Josie just give me the thumbs up. That's useful to know, actually, because there was a point where Zoom was just lying about high def and turned off high definition video kind of blanket unless you're paying through the nose for it. It looks like they've turned some of that back on again as their system has stabilized. But if you care about the video quality to the point where you want people to be able to read text in presentations, then you've got some challenges about how you present slides. We asked teachers whether they could install software on their tablets and their PCs, and to a first approximation, the answer is probably not. We concluded from these graphs that we should not be asking teachers to install any software at all, and we actually chose to go further than that. That you could solve the classroom PC doesn't have a webcam problem by posting a school a webcam, and we know several projects that are doing that. Fine. We worried a bit about what happens if that webcam, as you plug it in, installs some drivers and brings the PC down, because then by accident you have disabled the class PC, which is not a situation the teacher in the class needs. The risk is very small, perhaps, but it's sort of Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. We decided early on that we were not comfortable with making any technical demands of the school. Anything that required a configuration change on their part, we wanted us to avoid. I commend that approach, even if it's not necessarily the easy one. We also asked schools to do a little bit of a bandwidth test, and these graphs are a little bit meaningless, I have to say. The bottom line is that in most schools, bandwidth is probably okay, except where it all goes pear-shaped and collapses on the day, and that does happen. So the implication is that things can and will go badly wrong, and you need a contingency plan. We have, I think, in one circumstance, ended up delivering over a speakerphone. Is that right, Joe? When everything just collapsed. You find things like everything works fine in a tech test, and then you discover that there's a Wi-Fi black spot at the back of the class, which is where the teaching assistant chooses to stand with the iPad. So you get no video back from the classroom. There are, again, this is a sort of urban schools. There are some anomalies here, and from the data, it would suggest that some schools don't have enough bandwidth. In fact, we haven't found one where it doesn't work at all yet, but we have found challenges throughout. So what we're trying to do, what we were trying to achieve, would be a lot simpler if what we were aiming for was a show, a performance that we delivered into the classroom. Because to be honest, at that point, you do something like YouTube Live, and that's fine and works and is fantastic quality and everybody can get. However, that didn't suit us because that wasn't the shape of interaction with the classroom that we wanted. So we thought quite long and hard about what the key features there were that we were trying to retain and what we required of the technology to be able to produce the interaction experience we wanted. And the list of requirements we had went something like this. I mean, I think we probably didn't articulate it quite as rigorously as this at the time, Joe. It was a bit more organic. We wanted live video. We wanted this sort of exchange where I can see you and hear you in real time, not 10 or 20 seconds delayed, which is what things like YouTube Live impose because of the technology stack they're using. We needed to be able to hear what was going on in the classroom because we wanted to be able to respond to it. We wanted the video quality to be good enough that it wasn't a distraction, that you could read text clearly from the back of the classroom. We wanted to be able to show PowerPoint slides, stream video with audio from the video, so we had video clips playing in. We want to be able to do this picture-in-picture thing where I can show you the full slide or I can still maintain eye contact with you, because if I was standing in front of the whiteboard and showing this presentation, you'd still be able to see me and we'd still have that personal interaction. And we wanted that with no installation of software or hardware in the classroom. And the last point is, for me, the really important one. wanted the system to be very straightforward for the performer to use, because we want the performer's attention to be on the classroom dynamic and the workshop they're leading, not on which button do I press, which application do I have to be in, which hotkey is it that does the thing that da-da-da. And I think more than anything, that led us down a particular route. I can't remember what next slide is. Okay, so we looked at a range of software solutions. And I've just listed these for kind of reference, but Open Broadcaster is free and is brilliant. We had a lot of fun playing with it. It's an amazing tool that allows you to combine multiple video streams and all sorts of graphics things. And it's a bit complicated to get started with, but it becomes, it's incredibly powerful and it works relatively well for the most part. We had a blast with it and then we rejected it because we had precisely one computer that could run it reliably. And that was a old junker laptop that we bought from eBay a couple of years ago. And we, in trying to extract audio from video that it was playing and push that out through the video stream mixed with us talking, we managed to completely destroy the audio stack within Windows and not be able to get back to it without reinstalling the PC. And at that point we thought, you know what? We're never going to be able to make this work on a university laptop where we don't have admin rights. And we're also working with a couple of other projects which where they're setting up sort of mirror systems to what we're doing and watching what we do very closely. And I just do not want to be in a situation where I'm supporting that. So Open Broadcaster and the other software they're terrific. They may well do what you need, in which case they're relatively cheap, but for us, not the right solution, we thought. We didn't really have the right computers. We had issues about the video sources, that we had access to good cameras, but they're stills or video cameras. They're not webcams. And I don't know if you were looking last year, you can't buy decent webcams currently. They've just been out of stock since last February. There are very few on the market anyway, which are good. And the good Logitechs have just been unavailable. And we had serious concerns about how fragile those systems might be. Plus, I'm an old broadcast hack, and sometimes you just want a big light up button. So what we ended up doing was buying these, and hopefully you've got a nice bit of video. This is obviously marketing stuff. These are it's a company called Blackmagic Design, who are an Australian broadcast supplier, and they do sort of, if you're in high-end broadcast equipment, you sort of sneer at Blackmagic because their stuff is 1/10 the price. Actually, it's quite good for our purposes. And this thing, which is an ATEM Mini, it's a little box that sits on top of your desk and gives you nice fancy light-up buttons that allow you to cut between, if I go back to, here's me on input 1, which is the camera, which is coming, it's an old stills camera that's, I've got HDMI coming out of that into the mixer. And when I press that, that's an iPad, which is showing you slides from Keynote, in this case a video playing, and I can press one more button and that puts me over the top. I've got the audio is coming from a lapel mic I'm wearing via a little box of tricks and into the mixer, and that's all happening seamlessly. And although there are a lot of buttons on that device, it's really lovely to use. There are relatively few of the buttons that you have to pay attention to, and you know that if you want to go back to talking directly to the camera, there is one button that you hit and it's always the same button. So I got a bit obsessed about control surfaces and always having, for the, let's pick the key tasks that you need to do as presenter and give you a button for each of those with no exceptions. What it looks like in practice is this. This is Joe's desk. As was, he hates this slide because he looks like a bit of a doofus in the preview. I'm sorry, Joe. This is all cobbled together. You can see that bits of this are kind of almost gaffer taped to his spare bed. He's in his attic. Let me see if I can sort of annotate this. Oh no, I've gone too far. Let me see if I can annotate this. Here's a camera. It's a big old camera that came out of my cupboard and miraculously still worked. Here's the aforementioned 200 quid eBay special laptop, which is running everything at this point. And here's the video mixer. So everything's going through the video mixer. Joe has two other video sources. One is this laptop, which is playing his slide presentation. I think in this case, that's PowerPoint. And the other source is this, which is an iPad with an HDMI out, which allows him to do some quite fancy stuff, which you'll see in a few minutes, but allows us to do very sort of interactive work. It's like a whiteboard equivalent. Let's just back all those out. This is the bit which took us a long time to wrap our heads around, and then turns out to be very simple. That's just an iPad with, you can see a classroom in there. This is during a presentation. What the class is seeing is Joe's face here and that view. What Joe is seeing is the classroom from another iPad that's being handled around the class by the teacher. What Joe is hearing is, let me see if I get this right. The camera, so the microphone is here, that's picking his voice up. His audio is going effectively through this little box of tricks, which is the cheapest audio mixer we could find, into his headphones. He's also got audio from the classroom, from an iPad in the classroom, which is on a second chat. So there's the chat that he's delivering to the front of the class, and then there's a separate channel, which is iPad to iPad. That's coming through the mixer, and then also to his ears. Why do that? Well, if you've tried this, you might have found there's a critical problem, that you can put something like Teams or Zoom or whatever in the front of the class, and the class can hear what you're doing, but you can't hear them because there's no microphone on the class PC, remember. So what you do is you start up another device, say the iPad that you've got, and you connect that to the same Teams or Zoom call, and at that point you get massive audio howl round for everybody. Somewhere you have to separate those two systems. The video conferencing is not designed for two devices in the same physical space. You can mute one of them, but it doesn't work for the person in Joe's position, because they hear themselves from the classroom speakers into the iPad and back to them on about a 250 millisecond delay. If you try talking over yourself with a quarter-second delay to hearing yourself, it's just not possible. So the mixer is how we've solved that, in that by mainstreaming, by having a loud version of your live microphone audio, you're hearing yourself as you expect to while you perform. And then it varies a bit from person to person. The way I choose to do this is take the classroom audio, the feedback audio, put it on one ear and mix down. And then I find I can hear myself well enough that I can carry on talking, but I've got enough awareness of what's going on in the classroom that I can pick up the general mood, and I can certainly hear my name being called by the teacher who's operating the iPad. And at that point, your hand goes to the faders, you mix down, or you mix up the classroom audio, and you listen to what they're trying to tell you. So in operation, you've got PowerPoint slides as you'd expect. You've got a couple of buttons which allow you to go in and out of different video settings, and you've got a couple of audio faders that allow you to fine tune what you're hearing so that you only hear the bit you want. And if you start drawing a wiring diagram of how all this fits together, it gets appallingly complicated, but in use, actually it's quite straightforward. And it's worked very well for us, albeit for odd reasons, we've not actually used it very much so far, which is where I think we come to next, Joe. Because having done all of that tech stack, the next thing that happens is you deliver a workshop into a class, and you find that none of the technology is really important in terms of what you and the class and the teacher want to talk about. It's all about the content and about the way the workshop is delivered. And that's right and proper and what we're aiming for. Joe, we wanted to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, we did. Oh, and I've got someone rustling. Oh, mobile phone delivery. Thank you. Oh, 21. Right, sorry about that. Yeah, so I think somebody say that there's a lot of technology going on sat in front of me now, but if we found a class that had a webcam and a microphone, we don't use some of those bits. The technology allowed us to start to think a lot more about the actual workshops we were going to deliver, how we were going to build those workshops, and it made us be able to be a lot more flexible about the things that we thought, yes, we can do that, we can bring that in, we can do that. So we built a couple of workshops and a couple of different ways that we could use these technologies, and threw them at 4 or 5 classrooms in the autumn term to see how they went. And in some cases, they went really well. And in fact, all cases, no matter what the technical difficulties, the feedback from the teachers was incredibly positive. In fact, one of the most interesting things I think I found really early on was teachers saying, I just want somebody else in this classroom with me. I really don't care what you do. I just want you on the screen because I am alone in here. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but only slightly, that teachers are missing those external voices. So finding ways to be in the classroom with them, to support them, is quite important, certainly for those teachers. And we found that actually recently this week, we had a chat with some teachers once the lockdown was announced, and they said, yeah, we want you here with us. We want you to be in the classroom if you can be. So we built some different workshops. We built some assembly style workshops, and we built up some a cryptography workshop, which is the one that we ran in schools for our main testing.
That's the one you're delivering there, I think, Joe, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one I'm delivering there, cryptography. So you've got the Enigma machines in there, and we're doing kind of activities with the classroom, which are kind of mediated by the teacher. And what's really interesting about this new model that we've got here, or what the technology allows us to do, is to really quickly start to actually have conversations that feel really quite real and are live with the classroom. There is some learning that goes on with it. It's not always as fluid as you'd like it to be. So for example, in one test, we have an issue whereby when the teacher walks to the back of the classroom, his iPad is far enough away from the Wi-Fi router that the signal drops out every time. And then there was another test where the only thing we had back from the classroom was text chat. But all those things did work, and everybody reported the experience from the classroom was a really positive one. But I think it's the fact that we'd been wrangling with this technology that allowed us to start thinking much more fluidly and creatively about what we could do in the classroom, because the technology allows us to do a lot of things, but we don't do them all in one go. We pick parts that we want to kind of showcase and use together with the classroom. And that's sometimes, like when Jonathan's doing his live note taking there, the feedback from the teachers was that was a really kind of eye-opening part of that workshop. There was kind of an audible intake of breath from the children, that someone had given me an answer, and the answer was appearing on the screen live in front of them, which in a normal workshop, if you were stood in front of them, of course you'd be writing down things they were saying, but they didn't think that was going to be possible in this way round. But it is. There are ways that we can facilitate those experiences so we can have a real discussion with the class and the classroom.
I think one of the things that, I mean, the old saying that for me, RT breeds contempt, and I think we've reached a stage where we're sufficiently familiar with the technology and the range of options that we have that we hold it in pretty much contempt, because to a first approximation, most of it doesn't work. But you cobble the bits together that do, and then what you find is that actually it's good enough, and in use, it's surprisingly fluid. It is, you know, we all suffer Zoom fatigue. We all have been in a situation where we've been in back-to-back calls like this for hours on end, and you go completely mad at the end of it. But it's not, it doesn't feel a world away from standing in front of the classroom, is what you told me, Joe.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's the first time it's weird. The second time it's slightly less weird, and by the third time you've done it, you've got your hands on the buttons that you need. So you're no longer formulaic in the workshop, because at the start it feels very script-like. I'm going to do this, then this, then this. But actually, you know that when this kind of conversation comes up, you have a set of tools at your disposal to be much more fluid within the classroom. Now it does fall within quite a fixed framework of what's going to happen, but that flexibility is in there. And that's by the time I got to that bit, it's the flexibility been able to use it well enough to bring that into the sessions, it didn't feel that far away from the classroom. Now, of course, I was miles away from the classroom, but in terms of being able to talk with that classroom and listen to them and then adjust what I'm doing based upon feedback from that classroom, that was entirely doable. And that was lovely, because I think there were points when during our testing of it, when we were quite worried that we'd never get that bit, that it was always going to be one way. There would be never a way to get something back in a meaningful way. And that's not to say that text chat coming back isn't meaningful. It is. And we did one workshop like that because a bit of technology failed. And I think the experience from the class was good there, but the experience as a presenter in that bit was very difficult. Not having audio from the class is a real challenge from a presenter point of view. You just feel really lonely, I think, is the best way I could describe it. That you,
yeah, we in our hands, we haven't done a slide for it, but we maybe should have. But you'll see in one of the other Padlets, there are a bunch of columns of things that we think are important, and some of them we've addressed, and some of them haven't. I've realised there's another heading entirely, which is about the kind of commercial aspect of this, of how do you do paid unlock streams. We haven't had to worry about that. That's not our bag at all. There'll be other people in this group, in this call, who maybe know more about that. But the things which have been important to us have been the kind of technology and getting that good enough. Aspect about performance, that there is a bit of a tendency to, when a camera's pointing at you, to go into kind of full-on children's presenter mode, and maybe that's not quite the right tone. And there's also a bit of an issue of, if you're a giant head appearing in the front of somebody's class like this, and you're quite close mic'd, if you project to the back of the classroom as you would expect to if you're standing there, it's going to feel really weird from a class perspective. And how do you catch those sorts of things and think them through? So performance aspects we've thought about. How we deliver and how we use it is what we'll come on to in a moment. And then there's a kind of resource and staff, human resource aspect to it, of how are you going to support your staff and your performers through learning which button does what, being able to debug it when somebody's unplugged the wrong thing, how you do user support, tech support, how are you monitoring quality, how are you, all of that kind of morass of staff training, which is an issue for us as well. We have colleagues that we work with who we want to handhold through it, because we're taking a finished system and dropping it in front of them and saying, now use that. Well, that's not the right way of us approaching it. Should we go on to kind of worked examples of how we've
yeah, I think so. So what we'll do now is we'll talk about kind of 3 examples that we're doing kind of in the classroom, and how we're looking at them in terms of actually how it allows, how we're working with the teacher within those. Because what's really interesting about this model is, because normally you'd rock up to a school and then you'd be the person in charge of the next hour in the classroom. But here you are working so closely with that teacher. They're moderating the technology, they're making sure it all works, but they're also, they're going to be part of, certainly in the style of workshops that we've developed, they're going to be leading parts of these workshops now in a way that they never would have done before. To us, that's brilliant. What we're doing is also upskilling teachers through this process in terms of their STEM understanding or STEM pedagogy, which we think is really cool, and which we think is a benefit of this system that we couldn't necessarily, or we found quite tricky to bring into what would be a live workshop when we were stood in front of the classroom kind of face to face. So I'm going to draw a couple of diagrams now that, let me do that, just me, that talk a little bit about, you can breathe now, Jonathan, and that will describe a little bit about how our workshops are working. So what we've got here is the kind of version 1 of our workshops, which is the one that I described as the cryptographer. And what we have is a presentation that I'm delivering to the classroom. And I'll just draw an arrow in there, deliver it into the classroom. But all the way through that presentation, there is opportunity for feedback from the children. So there are points where we'll stop and ask questions, and those questions are always moderated by the teacher. So it's the teacher who is kind of holding an iPad or typing in the text chat the questions that they want to share. But then during this workshop, we'll end up having an activity as well. And that's the kind of activity that I'll introduce, but I'll actually hand it straight off to the teacher. And then for part of that workshop, I'm going to be kind of in the background. I'm not live anymore. I might be doing the same activity on the screen, so slightly slower pace, but I'm not talking to anybody because it is just distracting. You don't want to see this big head talking at you when you're trying to, in the case of the cryptographer workshop, when you're trying to solve some code. And so what you end up having here is the kind of dialogue and discussion ends up flowing back and forth between the teacher there. You've shared the stuff with the teacher beforehand, so they know what's going on at this point. They've seen the worksheet, and they've been watching the presentation so they can see how to solve the problems that we're gonna set in there. And at some point, that all gets fed back into me, and the kind of cycle moves around and starts again within the presentation. There's about 2 activity points within this presentation. It lasted about 45 minutes. We weren't quite sure how long it was going to last, but all the feedback afterwards from teachers is that that hour session is still a doable session, as long as it is kind of chunked up and there is lots of different points for discussion, points to stop and think, points for independent work. Group work is a little bit trickier. We've steered clear of group work just because it very much depends on how a school is set up at the moment. We've assumed that children are working as individuals in the classroom, so that we don't put any pressure on teachers to bring together a group of children when they feel like they shouldn't, or they've been told that they shouldn't.
I was going to put in there. One of the things to note here is that the teachers are, the TA are directly involved in the delivery of the workshop, and have to be because they're physically holding the camera and the microphone, which are giving us a feedback route. So they're curating what we see and hear, and there's a constant dialogue between the performer and the teacher. In many ways, that's an advantage for us. Remember that one of the things we're trying to do here is show and coach teachers in a particular approach to delivering science lessons. And inevitably, when we're physically in the space, it's very tempting for the teacher to sit at the back and catch up with marking or lesson prep. So slightly cheekily, there's an aspect of genuine benefit to us not being there and having to deliver remotely. One of the things that Joe was very big on right from the beginning was, where are the advantages? In March, everything was very we were all very depressed and doom-laden about everything, and reasonably so, but where can we find things that are actually advantageous? And there are advantages to be had. That was one of them for us.
Mm-hmm. So there we got kind of the standard workshop there that we have run in tests, and we've got kind of going on in January this year. We've unfortunately been able to do less of this than we quite like due to total other factors to do with the university we work at and the computer systems there, that meant we've not been able to do as much as we quite wanted. But everything we have done is kind of has been tested, which is,
it became really difficult for us to turn a computer on for a couple of months.
Yeah.
In fact, we couldn't.
So the second style we've got is how do we recreate, how do we do something with assemblies? So we've got this model of assemblies called encounters, and we wanted to think about how we could retain that dialogue. So in an assembly that we would go in, we would be talking to the children. It wouldn't just be a presentation. How do we retain some form of dialogue in there in an assembly format? And we can't really do this by getting video back from the classroom, because we might want to go into multiple classrooms at once. And so in this way, we'd have a presentation again like we did before, but we would start by sending that presentation to the teacher. And the teacher would do that presentation with the children. And this presentation is a presentation about a STEM worker. It has a bit of information about them. And then there's an activity that goes with it that's done in the classroom entirely by the teacher, where they generate some questions. And these are questions that they're going to ask. They would like to ask of the STEM worker when they come in on their virtual assembly. And of course, this bit here is entirely separate from anything I'm doing. It's on a different day. I've sent the presentation in, it's happening separately. And then what happens is those questions are fed back to us at NUSTEM, and it's actually my colleague Mel who's been doing most of the work here. She's doing all of these assemblies and doing a great job on them as well. And And what we end up with is a new presentation that we do alongside our STEM work that then is just delivered straight into the classroom. And this is done by Teams Live, not a Microsoft Teams meeting. And that's because what we want to do is make it available. It's live, you can watch it as it's happening, or 20-second delay, but we also want you to be able to go back to it, or if every classroom in the school has logged on and that has caused a bandwidth problem, schools can actually change the quality setting in Teams Live so we can make it more accessible to more children throughout the course of a morning rather than live, rather than it all being at the same time live. So what we have here is a second point where this is another day. And there's actually about a week between these two things when they happen. And all these has been able to think about workshops in this way, carefully about kind of how we structure them, is because that technology is innate, and that practice with the technology has enabled us to say, yes, we can do this here, or yes, we can do this here, yes, we can do this here. Let's put these together. So I'm going to describe the next one. So I know we've got on the call a couple of people from the Union Chain Bridge project and from Our Past Your Future at Museums Northumberland. So I'm describing now one of the workshops that we've been talking about with those groups that we're working quite closely with. And this is a model that really is quite exciting, I think. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this one plays out. Did you press the wrong button? So here we have, same as the first one, a presentation that we do in the classroom, and it kind of has that same kind of flow within it, where we talk to the children, we get feedback from the children, and then they have that presentation flows. And this is a kind of discrete session, maybe half an hour long or something like that. And then what we have is we leave them with that activity. An activity that they're going to do maybe during the course of a week. It might be collecting some data over the course of the week. It might be doing some planning over the course of the week. And that activity is entirely delivered by the teacher. And then that, I'm a bit too small there, then that feeds back to us, wrong color, like that. And we come back in maybe a week later and we do another presentation that's based upon the work they've done in the classroom. And again, we have that same idea whereby we've got that conversation there. What's really nice about this is we've gone from having a short-term engagement to a longer-term engagement with the group. We have provided input and stimulus and discussion about that. And then we've handed over the expertise to the teacher in the classroom to become the person who is in charge of the next bit, to collect data or whatever that task is. And then we have an endpoint of that where they're feeding that back up to the into us, which then becomes the part of our second presentation with them. And these presentations end up being a little bit shorter. They're not going to be kind of a full hour. They would be maybe half an hour. So in terms of time, because there's no travel time for us anymore, travel time disappeared. I don't think I've traveled anywhere since March. It is not a great deal more work for us, in that the amount of time we're in front of a class is about an hour, whether you do it in 1 hour, where we do it here, where we've got this longer term model where we're doing it in 2 hours. And the two workshops that neither have been ironed out and neither are set in stone, and the people who are involved in them might shout at me this afternoon in various meetings for talking about them. One's are kind of about possibly about wind turbines and schools doing some surveying of their own site about where they might put a wind turbine, and coming back to us with that data and presenting it to us. And the other one is, so the Union Chain Bridge is a bridge restoration project between the border of Scotland and England. And the one we're discussing there is about them planning to take down a model of a bridge and putting it back together again. And of course, the detail we want the children teachers to do can't really be done in a 1 hour session. We want teachers to be talking about this regularly with their children separate to what we're doing. So I think that kind of summarizes the three styles of workshops we've got. We've also got one which is about a family workshop, where we're going via Zoom directly into children's houses, doing early years storytelling as well. And that's I could draw a diagram for this, but I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious there's quite a lot of questions coming up that we'd really like to kind of get to. So I'm not going to. I can draw it later if somebody is interested in earlier storytelling with families. So I'm going to pause there, I think, unless, Jonathan, you have anything to say on these diagrams.
So where we've got really interested in this, and why we wanted to share these diagrams with you, is that we're trying to work out how to express where our thinking's at, which is entirely about how we use the tech and how those dynamics work. The thing that's interesting about the Union Chain Bridge workshops and those plans is that previously, us going into a school to set up an activity, leaving the school with the activity, is going back to do the next bit, is an awful lot of travel and contact time that's very hard to manage within project budgets, and particularly in that project, which is quite a dispersed area. And working with quite a large number of schools, that's going to be quite challenging. So there is an efficiency argument for if we can do bits of this with video, if we can bring in the specialist or the expert or the researcher or the engineer to do a 10-minute slot in the middle of a session about, we can make a much richer product for the school with actually less impact on us in terms of our time and our logistics. So that's tremendously appealing, and we've a creeping suspicion that as and when we're all, fingers crossed, vaccinated and we can go back to actually going into schools, that some things we will still continue to deliver through these sorts of tools, because it's just more efficient and probably more effective. Wearing a university impact hat, it's quite exciting to think about being able to do an assembly to several schools, maybe even simultaneously, without the academic having to leave their room. And there are disadvantages to that, but there are clear advantages as well. And if we've all become familiar and comfortable with that, yes. Should we take 5 minutes, Joe?
Yeah, so I think that the next bit, the plan now is just to break for 5 minutes, to have a think and kind of synthesize everything you've heard us kind of talk about there. That remote delivery workshop thoughts Padlet is up, and there's already some questions in there, and there's some people making comments. Please do that, and if you have ideas that solve other people's problems or further questions, this is definitely not about me and Jonathan providing all the answers, because we just have the answers, and we barely have the answers to the bit that we're doing. So if we spent 5 minutes just kind of either go and get a coffee or something like that, drop some thoughts into those remote workshops delivery, and we'll see if we can pick out some themes from there and see if we can bring some discussions to the front. What I don't expect we're going to be able to do is get through everything. I think there's going to be a lot of questions, and we'll have to have a bit of a discussion at the end about where we go next with this and how we get more answers to these kind of questions. What I would suggest, though, if you can just help me out by, because Padlet is anonymous, it's going to be quite difficult to work out who has who's put something down. If you can just tag it with your initials or your name, that'd be really useful, especially if you're commenting as well, so people can find who they're going to talk to, or who we might bring to the front of the Zoom, as it were, to answer some questions. That'd be brilliant. So if it's okay with everybody, and we give everybody about 5 minutes, and then we kind of reconvene at 11:05.
Yeah,
Sharon, I'll just pass back to you.
Well, I was just saying there's quite a lot of interest about your storytelling model as well with the early years. I think people really enjoy doing that. So I don't know if you might be able to whiz through that at some point. Either we could sort of just keep people chatting over the break, obviously, if anyone wants to unmute and just have a chat, or if you want to disappear off and get a cuppa. But I wonder if we can just do that quickly when you come back, if you're happy to do that, Joe.
Yep, I could do that now if you wanted.
Super. So yeah, we're going to break for 5 minutes. Don't feel you have to stick around. Go and grab yourself a coffee.
Now I can use my test card image. There we go.
Yay!
That dates me. That definitely dates me. Nice. I like that.